now, synecdoche and metonymy are special poetic metaphors. And they happen all the time. They happen even in general speech, but people don't know they're using them. All right? So synecdoche is seeing a part for the whole. So think about this. You live in the Pleistocene or some era back in the day where everybody was cavemen, okay? And you had to fight for your life on a daily basis and for food. So you suddenly come upon an enemy. Let's say it's a saber-toothed tiger, right? And he's staring you down, and you climb up a tree and wait for him to leave or throw rocks at him, and you get away. Okay? You go back to tell your people, and you remember you're a primitive person. You don't think like a modern person. You barely have names for things, right? Language is just emerging. You go back to your people and you say, guess what I saw today? The fang, right? You use a part, the fang, to represent the whole, right? That's synecdoche, a part for the whole. People use it all the time. Like if you call somebody big mouth, or somebody had like a really huge head and you call them big head, that's a part to represent the whole. Or mustache. Let's say somebody had a mustache. Yeah, what's up, mustache? Maybe you wouldn't say that. That's nice. Or not nice, maybe. Okay, on the other end, synecdoche is a part for the whole, but metonymy is so close it overlaps, okay? So, you're a caveman, right? Again. And the next day you go walking out, you run into another person that threatens you. Another thing that threatens you is not a saber-toothed tiger. This time it's another caveman. And he's got something you don't. He's got an axe, right? So when you go home to your caveman wife, that don't make sense. Your cave woman wife, you say, guess what I saw today? The axe. All right. So that is referring to somebody by something associated with it. Let me move so you can see this. This caveman is like a real caveman that they found. I like that. They found somewhere and he found a skeleton and stuff, and they recreated it. Okay. All right. So here's another poem. It's called The Poetics of Sex. In bed we find no clean division of body and soul. Anatomy is metonymy. Kissing your parts. I mean the whole. Here are some examples. Tell me, guys, what this is. Synecdoche or metonymy? They took my lover's tallness off to war. That would be metonymy, right? Something associated with it. You could also argue it's part of him, really, so it could be they kind of blend together. This is T.S. Eliot from the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. He says, I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. So I should have been a pair of claws. He doesn't say I should have been a lobster or a crab, just a pair of claws, because that's the most dominant part of them. We listen while a dustpan eats the scattered pieces of a coral. So that's another metaphor that's something associated with it, right? Because a coral might make scattered pieces of whatever got broke in the coral, right? That's kind of how they work. All right, so let's talk about anti-poetry. There was a movement in poetry. Initially, poetry was about describing the most beautiful, mighty, and the most high things, the most sacred things, right? But eventually, people started writing that got old, right? And so people started, like, there's a divide between the sacred on one hand and the profane on the other. The profane is like the near, the low, the common. People started to poeticize that kind of stuff. And Emerson rejoiced in that fact. As he said, with the rise of democracy, the near, the low, and the common was explored and poeticized. Paradox is something very similar to an oxymoron, which we've talked about. Shakespeare uses a lot of paradox as well. Heraclitus, he's an ancient Greek philosopher, he said, in the tension of opposite, all things have their being. William Blake, several hundred years later, wrote a long lyric poem called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And he said, without contraries, there is no progression. And if you think about it, that's true, right? I mean, our minds can only operate on uh, a careful balance of direct opposites, right? Um, Light and dark, day and night, male and female. And this is how our minds are like difference engines. They can't think without these pairs of opposites. And a lot of the teachings of Eastern religion are kind of transcend those pairs of opposites. So instead of having one or the other, that's why they have the lingam and the yogi right there. That's a picture of what that is. And that's a traditional, I don't remember what country that comes from, some Asian country where they have the male and the female symbol together. Okay? That's kind of like um, the chalice, the female symbol, and the phallus, the male symbol. But we're not going to get into all that. So our lives are arranged, or they consist of a complex of inexorable opposite, day and night, birth and death, happiness and misery, good and evil. And if you think about it, if it weren't so, existence itself would come to an end. Right? You can't. How would you know what evil is if you, or how would you know what good is if you didn't have evil? Right? It wouldn't be meaningless. It would make no sense. It would be like just the state of things, and it wouldn't have any value to it. So having the antithesis gives the value to the thing on the side that we consider good, right? So in that sense, the bad stuff's good too. You know, if you think about it like that, that's sometimes referred to as moral relativity. Well, moral relativity is more like uh, anything I do is going to be bad to somebody, even if I think I'm helping. You know, because if I eat some food or if I share food with this guy right here, I'm taking food away from somebody else. So that's kind of the idea of moral relativity. I don't believe it. I think there are clear things, morals. So Isaac Newton, of course, he saw the world as the universe itself comprised of equal and opposite pairs having equal and opposite reactions. For every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Physiology does the same thing. It shows us that the only way we can stand up is because there are two muscles pulling in opposition to each other. You have one muscle pulling this way, it's called an agonist, and another muscle pulling this way called an antagonist. And if you didn't, no one would be able to walk or do anything like that. So everything, good and bad, creation, destruction, seems to work curiously together. It's an interesting way to think of things once you get into it. This is something from Shelley. Shelley said, I don't remember where Shelley wrote this. Our sincerest laughter with some pain is fraught. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. All right, of course, irony. The last thing we're going to talk about. You guys know what irony. Irony, is hard to define, but you know it when you see it. And I gave you guys the definition. It's a play of opposites. It calls attention to a play of opposites. But irony is a contrast between expectation and reality. Now, verbal irony is when things have a double meaning and when someone says the opposite of what they mean. So we just did an example. Macbeth is talking to the murderer, and he says, "Is Banquo safe?" And the murderer says, "Yeah, he's safe in a ditch." So he's dead essentially. And there's no real reason to say that. Why didn't he just say, "Is he dead?" That would be a normal way to say it, but Shakespeare's smarter than that, and he uses that to show just little things like that the audience would have picked up on that they really enjoyed. Um, saying the opposite sometimes emphasizes its opposite more, right? This is a pun, but for whatever reason, Macduff's wife and kids had been killed by Macbeth, and Ross tells him, he pretty much lies to him. He says, "How does my wife?" And Ross says, "Why, well, and my children, they're well too. The tyrant has not battered at their peace." And he says, "No, they were well at peace when I did leave them." This is also a sort of pun. It has a double meaning, but it's also verbal irony because it's the opposite of what he means. And it's kind of inexplicable other than it emphasizes the opposite of the opposite. Okay? All right. Dramatic irony we've been talking about during Act 2. The audience knows something characters do not. Lady Macbeth. Macbeth says, "Will all Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? No, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seas incarnadine." Incarnadine means make red, making the green one red. And little Lady Macbeth comes back in and says, "A little water clears us of this deed." People would have immediately seen that irony. What we know that the characters don't is what Macbeth said while Lady Macbeth was gone. So a lot of times, like I said, it was extreme exaggeration, which is hyperbole. A lot of times these figurative language things tie in all together. Situational irony is easy. Is when what happens is the opposite of what is expected to happen. Okay, so let's say you go down to the DMV to get your driver's license. You do your test perfectly, no mistakes. You parallel park the car. You get your license. They congratulate you. As you're pulling out, you're driving home. You're excited. You get in the car to leave. You pull out and you back over your instructor and kill him or run him over. That would be situational irony. I know that sounds. It's the exact opposite of what you'd expect to happen. An astronaut lands from outer space. The space shuttle just touched down and like this would be weird. He fell and like hit his head as soon as he's stepping off the spaceship and broke his neck or something. Okay, all right. So there you guys go. That's poetry. We're going to talk about it in greater detail, and I have several more PowerPoint points to show you the ins and outs of poetry and things while we finish up reading Macbeth. But for now, that's where we're going to leave it. And let me see. Everything in this PowerPoint pretty much comes from this book right here. Everything I teach you about poetry comes from this book. It's called Western Wind, and it's by David Mason and John Frederick Nims. And it was a poetry book I had in class when I took poetry in college. And I kind of made it, took the stuff and kind of condensed it and made it for high school purposes. So, anyway, let's see. How do I turn you off now? Oh, here? Okay. All right, guys. God bless.